off on this opiate thing, but the opiate
It is related. It is related.
A result of the 9/11.
But is this caller still waiting to talk to us?
No, it's not a caller. I mean, he can call in if he wants. I don't see anything on the Discord. Is it Discord or?
There's Discord call-in lines, I think.
Yeah, I don't. This on-air.
All right, that's
Twitch
okay.
or D-Live. They can
That's
call
all right.
in one way or another. I forget.
If you are listening to the show, it's Silver Dave, Nobody, and Mr. J Noon, and we are having a grand old time here on 9/11, just reminiscing about all the different ways the government has screwed over its own people, and the politicians have got rich in the process. Just certain politicians, but don't worry, you lost a lot in the process. So you can take that to the bank.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I'm not sure how these guys actually call in on a show here, but
I'm not sure how these guys sleep at night.
But
like,
I think
how did the Bushes sleep at night? They're like, well, we sleep pretty good, Dave.
Yeah.
Discord
Don't
line.
Well, the thing
is how you call
people
in.
will absorb
Got $100 billion.
people absorb the moral system that they're taught.
How could
and these
anybody...
people were taught from the beginning of their lives that they and people like them and people in their families were literally the only families that matter. I mean, it's no different than a Prince Andrew who grew up, and it's like, you know, he thinks he's so important that 100 men should die to protect him, and he's actually got 100 men stupid enough to believe him.
That's right. You know, when I was a kid, I used to always say, you know, when people would talk about a king, and I used to always say, well, why don't the people just kill the king? I used to always say that. Why don't they just kill him? He's just this one guy. He's got to just overrun him, work together. You know, why don't they kill the king? But instead, they have to give most of their wealth and most of their earnings to the king so that he can build an empire and continue to take their liberty. Now, instead of a king, we have these corporations, but they work together with the government to use a combination of marketing techniques and force to control us, to get us to buy more, to consume more, to get us to keep less of our earnings. I mean, who are these guys? I mean, and the other thing to me, and I know I'm like soapboxing here, but people are like, oh, but they're our representative. They represent us. How
they
could
don't
anybody
represent shit about me?
How could anyone believe that, like, Bush is or Bernie Sanders, these guys have never worked at a job and they have millions and millions of dollars? How could they represent us? How could they even know?
Even
what
like
it is
Elizabeth
like?
Warren and Hillary Clinton. I mean,
how could they
they've
know
never
what it's
worked
like?
jobs either.
Yeah. How could
They're
these
just
people know what it's like to be a person? They've never worked. They've just always had all this money that they got from their parents and from inheritance and other things. How could anyone be like, oh, they could represent us so well? How could anyone believe it? And it just finally, I'm about to finish off, but I just want to sing just a quick 2 lines of a little song that I like. And I call it They Own You. And the song goes a little like this. I'm only just going to give you just the little ringer, and it goes, they own you, and you fucking love it. Aw, yeah. 'Cause they fucking own you, and you fucking love it. That's right. You love it. They own you.
Ain't nobody got
That's
time
it.
for that.
That's it.
So, some more numbers here I checked. So, cigarette deaths last year, 2018, was 480,000 in the U.S. according to a quick search.
Can you give me that again?
480,000 people died from cigarette-related deaths, according to the CDC.
Forget guns, ban cigarettes.
And
they're horrible. They kill so
Please
many
don't.
people. They're evil. Just kidding.
God.
And opiate deaths.
And I'm kidding, because I think people should choose and accept the responsibility from their choices. If they decide that they're going to suck start, they're 45, or they're going to smoke cigarettes or crack or whatever, and it hurts them or doesn't hurt them, it's their fault. That's fine.
Well, that's how Darwinism works. If you make decisions that lead to your death, you die. So you are eventually replaced by organisms that don't make decisions that lead to their deaths.
Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
So here, according to the who is it? CDC again. In 2017, 72,000 people in the United States died from overdoses, according to, I didn't read the whole article, but something just showed up. So what we have as a result of 9/11 is massive opiate. We have massive military industrial complex, and it is just if you can, keep families. The best way to keep a family distracted is if someone in that family is either hooked on some kind of drug or is autistic. That's going to take a lot of energy from that family. Can you imagine having like an autistic child or a child that's or a teenager or something that's hooked on heroin, or a sister, or someone you love?
It takes 3 people to take care of that one person.
Right. So those families that have this extreme dependent situation, whether it's from drugs or some medical issue in someone in near family, whatever it may be, guess what they don't do? They do not pay attention to politicians. So if people do not pay attention to politicians, don't call out politicians for bad behavior. So a lot of America is distracted, and I believe that this heroin epidemic is also part of an agenda to distract the American public from what the politicians are doing.
I think it's one of many weapons of mass distraction.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, but it's an element of it, and everybody either knows a junkie. I think everybody knows a junkie, or someone who's recovering, or someone who's struggling,
was a junkie,
or maybe even was. Yeah. I mean, if you don't know a junkie, that was me or whatever, But it is just unbelievable. But what about these molten puddles of steel that they were finding in the weeks after the wreckage? Do you have any idea how that happened in at World Trade Center?
Well, I have a theory.
Okay.
So my theory is that, first of all, if you know anything about melting metal, particularly steel, if you were to dump molten steel into a cold hole in the ground and bury it in dirt for a month, it would not stay molten for a month. It would not stay molten for a minute. Maybe a minute. Now, maybe a few minutes.
A few minutes.
I would want to touch that metal for quite a while.
Now, it may stay hot. It may stay hot for a full 12 hours. That before it goes down to room temperature, but it would lose its liquidity. It would be no longer liquid in moments, in minutes, and then of course it would stop glowing in a short amount of time. But a month after, they're still digging up wreckage, and there's pictures, there's videos of these guys digging up wreckage, and they're finding molten steel underneath the ground. Now, my theory is that to make these buildings go down, what they had to do is they had to cut all the tension and compression members simultaneously across about 10 stories, up and down. And they had to do, each story had to be simultaneously on a horizontal, meaning that all of those tension and compression members on each story, all the way across from left to right and forward to aft, all had to be cut simultaneously, and then either working its way upward or down. Now,
what would happen if your charges weren't symmetrically placed?
So if there was even the slightest mistake made in setting and rigging up these charges, the whole thing wouldn't work, and it would topple to the left or the right. So first, we're talking about an amazing feat of technology. We're talking about like the best demolition experts in the world, and a whole lot of them. And I bet they're dead because they, probably would have talked. Now, what's my theory? My theory is that sometime, so either sometime prior to, during the construction of the building.
There's an elevator company. Have you guys heard of Dr. Judy Wood? She does a book about 9/11, and they talk about this elevator company. I don't know if it's ABC or Acme, but basically they had this contract to redo the elevators, and then the company went bankrupt like days before or days after the whole thing or whatever.
I didn't hear about that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, go on with what you're going to say.
Yeah. I don't want to get in too much detail because I know we have limited time. But basically, my theory, we're going to skip how, because the how, maybe I should just cover the whole thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, do it.
So either A, these, we're going to call them charges, but they're incendiary devices. Okay. Now, incendiary is also called incendiary is also called a what's the other word I'm looking for? Whatever. Incendiary charges melt.
You mean the
metal.
thermite cutters?
Thermite.
Yep.
It's also
Oh,
some people
okay.
will call incendiary is another term for thermite. Now they have some very, very high tech thermite
I built
systems
a thermite cutter kind of once.
that go real hot, like 5,000 degrees, super, super crazy hot.
Thermite is basically burning iron, correct?
Iron filings combined with an oxidizer, some other things usually can be used.
Isn't
There's different
it aluminum
chemical.
too?
Aluminum is another one that can be used. Aluminum powder.
Magnesium.
Magnesium also.
Anarchist Cookbook. I actually set magnesium on fire when I was a teenager. It was the first thing I ever downloaded was an Anarchist Cookbook when I was in high school. And we had this old pickup truck behind the barn, and I had a magnesium cover off a motorcycle, and I filed in that thing with a horseshoeing rasp for like 20 minutes at a time over days. And I literally filled up like it was the bottom of like a 2-liter soda bottle, about 3 inches of magnesium filings from this motorcycle case.
Mm.
And we got some of that burning, and that stuff like burns your eyes. It's like such an
Super
insane.
bright.
Oh, yeah.
Super
It went
bright.
right through the hood of the pickup truck, and it went down on the engine, and it like melted like the carburetor. This is old junk truck out in the woods. We were like, oh, my dad's like, what are you guys doing? And it finally burnt out, but it got, because we were going to keep on putting the filings on it.
So
yeah, it's pretty wild.
So these thermite, they require oxygen to work. And so the other thing is that they would have to be affixed to each of the I-beams, to each of those compression and tension members. So you can't just like stick it to the side of a drywall. You got to actually go after each of these really critical members. So they would have either had to remove all the walls to install these things. It would have been a long project, or they did it that day and they sent, like 200 guys up there and they secured all the exits. So like the planes hit, boom, buildings are on fire. These guys go into the building. They secure all the entrances and exit. They kill everybody with just machine guns. They just kill everybody that's on the stories that they need to rig because they know the buildings are going to go down, and those guys, they can't let them leave. And so then they rip all the drywall off. They fix all the charges. They rig onto all the tension and compression members all the way up for, we're talking about 10 stories. So taking hundreds of guys that are really good at this.
It would take months to rig that building.
Yeah,
a regular demolition crew.
So
Is
either
it true
well, it
that there
depends
were
how many guys they
zero
have.
survivors that were above where the plane hit
Correct.
the building?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought
That's
so.
what I'm pretty sure is correct. So, and that supports this. Now, this is one of two theories. Either one to me is incendiary. One is they either affixed them at the time of the planes hitting, and they had like 2 hours. But then, of course, these demolition experts thought they were going to get out. But of course, the guys on the other end pressed the button, initiated everything before they got out. That way, there would be no witnesses. Or they did it months or years prior and rigged the building, but didn't initiate. Now, let's get back to the flames under the ground. Why is my mind fixated on incendiaries? Well, if incendiaries were used to melt all these steel beams, first, it would create an enormous amount of heat for people floors up that were like jumping out of windows because of the huge amount of heat. So like that's sort of makes sense. But then also when the building would crash down to the ground, all the debris drives down to the ground and all piles up debris under these incendiary thermite charges. And it neutralizes, it stops the oxygen from getting to these charges, extinguishing them. Then, weeks later, wrecking crews are digging into the ground, removing wreckage, then creating little tunnels of air reaching down to where the not completely burned incendiary systems exist. And when the oxygen hits the incendiaries, it turns right back on fire. The way they work is they're in a casing, and when you open the casing, like on a thermite grenade, when you flip the top open, it opens it, and then oxygen reaches it, and it just burns. So when all that debris put out the incendiaries, and as they dig it up, the incendiaries that hadn't fully burned, that are still attached to all this molten metal that's blobbed down into the ground, Well, it starts burning again, and it melts that metal again, and that's why these guys are finding molten metal a month later under the ground. That metal wasn't molten for a month. It just started melting again when they dug down to it and let oxygen get to those incendiaries. So my theory is incendiaries were used. Now, whether they applied and installed them years earlier, weeks earlier, months earlier, or that day, if they did it that day, it'd be an incredible, incredible, incredible feat.
So I just Googled elevator company 9/11, and Ace Elevator showed up. So I've heard about this before. Architects, engineers for 9/11 Truth talk about Ace Elevator. And this Dr. Nels Harrod has estimated that it would take tons of explosives to demolish the buildings. Demolition experts such as Tom Sullivan have said it would be quite easy to plant them if a group had access to the elevator shafts next to the core columns. The words Ace Elevator or ACE are not found anywhere in PDF files in 9/11 Commission. Although elevator appears multiple times, you can check out for yourself. So yeah, Google some. It looks like this Ace Elevator company had like a contract to and was working on these elevators, and that is how you'd want to take the company out, because the elevators were all within these, support columns that supported the buildings. That's where you'd put the elevators, the strongest place.
I think I remember that in the weeks leading up, they had workers in that building that they said were stripping asbestos also.
Yeah, you got to strip these, just like Dave is explaining. You can't take the cutter charges and put them on the asbestos-coated beams, right?
You'd have
to remove the asbestos.
Charge to target contact is the most important factor of steel cutting. Literally, right out of the textbook from Demolition Explosives Handbook from the military, FM, I forget the FM number, but you could definitely just look up Military Explosives Manual, and you'll find an field manual 380-25 or something like that. Anyway, charge to target contact is the most important factor. If you took a block of M112C4 and you took that block and you pressed it firmly against an I-beam, that, there's a calculation to determine how much of an explosive, based on the type of explosive, the weight of the explosive, the thickness of the I-beam, and the diameter, and so on. Well, there are calculations that were, thoroughly part of my, process to determine the right charge. But if you were to take the proper amount of C4 that it would take to cut an I-beam, for example, and you were to press that C4 against the I-beam and detonate it, you would cut your I-beam the way you intend. Now, if you took that exact same block
fun and games
of C4 and you placed it 2 inches away from the I-beam, instead of pressed against it, just 2 inches away, it would now not work. It would not cut the I-beam. It would just make some brown color on the I-beam, but it would not cut it. That's how important it is. This stuff has to be pressed firmly against the target. So these guys that demolished these buildings had to have major access to all of those tension and compression members. I mean, this is an incredible feat that they did. These guys did something unbelievable. If anything, I mean, at least we could be impressed by the technological capability. And then we could also be impressed by the fact that they convinced people that a tinfoil airplane, which is designed to be light, crashed into 150,000 tons of structural steel and concrete.
And the plane
knocked
won.
It down. And the plane won. And now jet fuel, which burns at 650 degrees Fahrenheit in a naturally aspirated environment, somehow melted steel, which takes 2,750 degrees to melt. And that's not to melt to instant liquid. That's where it starts to melt.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to be, either unaware or just a total freaking idiot to believe the story. And I'm not saying that if you believe the story, you're not an idiot if you believe it.
Degrees.
You're what?
My oven goes up to 550 degrees.
Yeah.
So,
jet fuel doesn't burn very hot. Jet fuel is a lot like diesel
fuel. So there's no way
fuel.
that the metal's going to melt or even soften.
If jet fuel worked so good for melting steel, then why do they use acetylene instead of jet fuel and a torch
Or coal.
or coal.
We use a
jet
coal
fuel
forge at man camp.
is kerosene. You ever had a kerosene lamp in your house? Kerosene, jet fuel, diesel. It's the same basic thing. When you light that on fire, it burns yellow, not blue, like what it takes to melt steel. It burns yellow.
And now, if you take diesel fuel, for example, I'm a diesel mechanic, and I have worked on diesel engines for a long time, and we have these things called pyrometers or exhaust temperature gauge. Now, in a combustion chamber where we're forcing tremendous amounts of oxygen in there, your diesel combustion temperature coming out of the combustion chamber will get to about 11, 12, 1300 degrees, but we're forcing, it's basically a forge. We're forcing tremendous amounts of oxygen in there. There wasn't oxygen being forced into the twin tower.
650 degrees,
Ambient,
naturally
yeah,
aspirated. Right. We're talking about what it takes if you're just burning jet fuel, not if it's being force compressed into a engine where it's being compressed.
Correct.
That compression.
But even when you're force compressing it in an engine that's already hot and you're doing this, over and over again, I mean, at 2,000 RPMs, this
only gets to
combustion
1100.
cycle is happening, 500 times a minute, and it still only gets to about 11, 1,200 degrees, and that's actually a little that's on the hot side if you're really over fueling the engine a little bit and putting a lot of air to it.
Even better yet, if you just believe what the government says at all, then governments lie. That's what they do.
Well,
that's what they do. They lie. Well, they also kill people.
Yeah,
they also
real good
take
at that.
liberty, and they lie. Every once in a while, they tell the truth, but only when they're lying within that.
Every once in a while, the truth coincides
and I guess
with their
even
interest.
it can't. It can't rain forever is the saying. So the government has to tell the truth once in a while, probably by accident, but it happens, I'm sure, once in a while.
So if you guys,
but if you believe their story,
have you guys ever heard of
get a vaccine?
Dr. Judy Wood?
I've heard the name.
Check out Dr. Judy Wood. She did this book on 9/11, this whole thing, and she believes that another element of 9/11 was of the Twin Towers, because there was a lot of rubble there that just shouldn't have been there. I mean, there should have been a lot more rubble than what was there, essentially, with the size of those buildings. So she believes that there was a direct energy weapon of some sort used.
I've heard that too. It's a very interesting theory.
Now, let me give you a little thing to think about. If you take a vacuum chamber and you put a cinder block in a vacuum chamber and you apply a vacuum, and then you put that vacuum chamber in a microwave, or let's say you make a microwave vacuum tight and you put a vacuum on a microwave and you put a cinder block in there, and you turn that microwave on and you put vacuum to it, it'll vacuum all the moisture out of there, and the microwave will heat it up, and literally you will have about a palm full of dust from a cinder block that weighs 42 pounds. There's some experiments have been done on this. So there was a major hurricane off the coast of New York and New England on 9/11. The only reason I know that is a friend of mine I was talking to about 9/11. I'm like, hey, where were you on 9/11? This was a few years ago. And he's a commercial fisherman. He goes, I was sitting at home watching TV, and because I couldn't fish that day because there was a major hurricane. And he can't go out. You can't go fishing when there's a major hurricane. You will die. And nobody knows.
I'd probably
there was a
stay
hurricane.
home even if it were a minor hurricane.
Well, sure, there was a big-ass hurricane happening off there. So when you have a hurricane, it creates this vacuum. Well, Dr. Judy Wood is also talking about these direct energy weapons she believes are the same things that have caused a lot of the California wildfires. So about a year and a half ago, roughly, it was in the spring. So, yeah, about a year and a half ago in California, there was 76 cell phone towers that caught on fire within a half an hour of one another. And this guy talking about this was actually on Ernie Hancock's show, Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock, which is on LRN.FM, 9 a.m. Eastern. It starts 5 days a week. You can even go to his freedomsphoenix.com and go into archives and just search cell phone fires, direct energy weapons, 5G. But basically, Dr. Judy Wood, I just Googled her name here, and she's talking about the wildfires basically caused by the same direct energy weapons that did the Twin Towers. Now, I don't. I'm not saying what she's saying
well,
is true.
I have seen pictures of those fires where it looks like there were circular fires in the middle of the woods where the houses were.
Right.
But the trees in between the houses aren't burned.
Right.
So there's not a clear path of how a fire could do that. That doesn't seem
all the houses
like
that set
anything
on
I've
fire,
ever seen before.
All the houses that burnt all have these fake Spanish tile roofs that are actually aluminum. So you ever see like tin foil, aluminum foil put in a microwave? You ever see what happens?
Oh, that would do it.
So a microwave sends out a frequency that essentially turns oxygen molecules. Roughly, it really turns like water molecules, but it also turns oxygen molecules as part of the frequency. So aluminum,
Oxygen is part of water.
Right. So aluminum oxidizes immediately. It is the oxidization layer on aluminum that makes this effect that aluminum doesn't rot out. So like, I really like aluminum horse trailers because, or livestock trailers, they're hauling cattle and horses, the urine and stuff rots the trailer out from the inside if it's steel, and then the salt in the roads rot it from the outside. Well, it doesn't happen with aluminum because it has this very protective oxidization layer. When you scratch aluminum with a wire brush or treat it with acid, you can, under a microscope or even right there in front of your eyes, you can watch it just oxidize. It oxidizes quickly. I weld a lot of aluminum, so I've learned about aluminum. Well, aluminum, when you put certain frequencies to it, even low powered or powerful or high powered frequencies, but you hit aluminum with frequencies that will rotate oxygen, like the 60 gigahertz range rotates oxygen because an oxygen molecule is about the size of 60 gigahertz. Well, these molecules, these oxygen molecules, what happens when aluminum oxidizes, it's oxygen and aluminum, they create like a oxidization layer. Like if you look at your battery terminal, sometimes they get like that cruddy stuff on it in your car. That's oxidization. That's from the oxygen in the air reacting with the acid and the lead. So the same thing kind of happens with aluminum. And when you turn those oxygen molecules by sending a radio frequency at it that is the same size of as the oxygen molecules, they jump around and get excited and they ignite. So that
sounds almost like there's been a theory that you can electrolyze water very cheaply if you hit it with a particular frequency of, I guess, sound.
Correct.
It sounds like a very similar...
Right, because you're turning the oxygen molecule or the water molecule or whatever. So at 9/11, there's in Dr. Judy Wood's book, she's about, I forget even what it's called. I should look up what her book's called. But she talks about and features a whole bunch of pictures where, like, the car is fine except for the aluminum wheels are gone. There is cars that aluminum engine blocks were missing, but, like, the crank is there. It's steel. The pistons weren't there. They're aluminum. And other steel parts were there, and aluminum parts were actually gone from cars. It's pretty crazy stuff. If you just search Dr. Judy Wood 9/11, there's videos that pop up. Really, really like things I can't explain and I don't understand. It is very interesting that these anomalies happen. And these same anomalies show up in the California wildfires about a year and a half ago.
Well, there's another thing, which is I've been arguing with people all day, and you know, it's only recently that I've been willing to say that, you know, that I was absolutely convinced that the government was lying about 9/11. I don't know what happened.
What the hell would make you think the government would lie?
No, because they just love you and they want you to be safe and happy.
The point is, I was arguing with people today about the Pennsylvania crash and the DC crash, and saying, well, aluminum doesn't vaporize. Because, you know, there's no wreckage. There's no plane there. They say that the fucking trench left by the Pennsylvania crash. Now, this is a crash that supposedly hit so hard that aluminum vaporized. It was 15 feet deep and 8 feet wide. What the fuck are you talking about? That airplane was huge. But it's interesting that now it sounds like there is a way to vaporize aluminum.
Well, you can vaporize tires, for example. tires on your car. You can vaporize them.
Oh, tires wouldn't surprise me.
But
if
let me
hit
tell you
them
about
hot.
vaporizing tires real quick. You could vaporize tires in a pressure cooker at home, and all you need is heat and a vacuum pump, and you put like you cut up a car tire or motorcycle tire, put it in a regular pressure cooker, and you take the hose from the pressure cooker and you put it to a vacuum pump, like an old old compressor from a refrigerator, and your byproduct will be natural gas, premium diesel fuel. Just Google tire into diesel fuel, and these YouTube videos show up. So you can do all this same stuff by heating elements and putting a vacuum to it. So you got to understand that water will boil at 70 degrees Fahrenheit in a vacuum of 27 inches. That's how a vacuum is measured by a it'll lift an inch of mercury, 27 inches. And so this can be applied to all kinds of things. You can do this with wood fiber, you can do this with concrete, you can do this with many other things. So all it takes is heat and a lot of vacuum. And the book by Dr. Judy Wood is Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Direct Free Energy Technology on 9/11. I have a friend of mine has a book. I spent about 3 days actually skimming through the book. It is
rubble pile would be like 50 stories tall.
Right. And there was hardly any rubble pile there compared, and people are like, a lot of people who have done demolition have been like, where's all the rubble? So
that's an excellent point, which
it certainly seems
never
a
even
lot
occurred to me before.
The problem with my incendiary theory is that it would just take so much to install this system. So many people, so much to install these things, putting them all on all the structural beams, but some high energy laser thing from the sky, as crazy as that sounds,
Star Wars, Reagan talked about it.
Sound like if that really was a technology that existed, it sounds, easier to pull off than the demolition feat.
Yeah.
By the way, we are almost out of time. So I think that we need to...
Should we turn into pumpkins?
We should make sure that we tell these audience any other things that we should, that they might want to know.
All right. Well,
I feel like we need to...
I guess I'll give myself a pitch. Come on out to electnobody.com. And I've got a blog up there, and do me a favor and leave a comment so I know you were there.
That's right, folks. Vote nobody. Nobody cares. Nobody listens. Nobody.
I really
nobody
hope,
knows the trouble you've seen.
Nobody knows,
and nobody knows you when you're down and out.
I really hope that we can do some.
And thank you, donor.
Somebody gave us some money, it looks like.
Oh, thank you.
Jaded Porcupine.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to go ahead and just plug. I just cut you off, Jay. Sorry, buddy. But if you don't have a gun church that you attend, can I recommend that you should look for a gun church in your area that's a group of people that get together and practice their
We still got 10 minutes
gun
left,
work.
so yeah, let's talk about gun
Well,
church.
and gun church is something that I've been hearing about it all over the country. There are these groups of people that are getting together and they're practicing their tactics, they're practicing their marksmanship, they're building a community, getting together, working together with their community to practice these skills. And I even go to one.
Building an army?
And, people, it's community self-defense is another thing I like to call it. So, I think that if you've heard of this, if you haven't heard of it, you should ask around. If you have heard of it, you should consider going because I think this is really important for the future. But that's most of all I want to just say about gun church.
So, Legend of Footmatic says, why are these guys acting like they have a time limit? Well, I live about almost an hour away from here. So, and I got to get up early tomorrow. We all got to, I know Dave's has stuff to do tomorrow. We don't need to be out too late. That's all. So we decided to cut it off at
11:30.
Oh, 11:30. I thought we were doing
we
midnight.
No, but we have just been a great show, so we
okay.
just gone. But I think at this point we're rocking till midnight. But as far as the person who's commenting, I mean, it sounds really great. Sounds like that's positive feedback. They're like, "Why are you guys stopping? Keep going." More. Harder.
So anyways, one thing I like about gun church is, so I've attended a couple of gun church events, and you get to know, we need to first off rely on our neighbors. So like using apps like Cell 411, call your neighbors instead of calling the cops. And because your neighbor's not going to come shoot your dog. And I will probably never, ever call the cops unless for like, it's like a life and death situation and I'm for some reason forced to. But with gun church, and we have our neighbors come and we get together and we teach each other knowledge about guns and we get experience using guns, and like people bring their 8 and 9-year-old kids, 70-year-old grandpas.
You better
show
coach
up.
those kids. Don't talk about this in school or they'll get thrown out.
Well, I mean, so what?
Well, if they do, you can just homeschool them. It'll be better anyway.
A couple of the kids are homeschooled that I've seen. But the thing is it's really good, like to know first off who to give a gun to, and who not to give a gun to. In case of a situation. So gun church is, we're gonna figure out who's like, who's good with guns and who's not, which is a good thing. But hopefully everybody will get better with guns. And we got to remember that the guns are there to protect the big gun. And what is the big gun? The printing press is the most powerful gun of them all. And because that's how we can educate people and tell people the minute that we don't have a right to bear arms, and we don't have a right to have guns, the next thing you won't have is a right of free speech and a right of free expression, because you will not be able to defend any other rights if you cannot have guns.
Imagine being in Tiananmen Square. They killed, it turns out, 3,700 people minimum in Tiananmen Square in one day.
Historically,
the Chinese army.
Once they take the guns, the next thing they do is start genociding people. That's historically, that's like, pretty much what happens next.
And how can you stop them?
They disarm the Jews, then they start killing them. So like when they come for your guns, it's not because they want to make you safe. They didn't disarm
the Jews. They disarmed the population and then killed the Jews.
They disarmed the Jews primarily.
Well, the thing is,
if you were Jewish, they stripped Jews of their rights, including the right to possess firearms, particularly Jews.
Oh, okay. See, I thought they just disarmed the whole population, pretty much.
Well, they disarmed, by the end, they had disarmed pretty much everybody who wasn't a Nazi Party member.
Oh, okay.
That's the thing.
But
you
the
could
Jews
still
were
get
like
a permit.
The first people that were losing their shoes, their guns, their possessions,
their gold teeth.
Yeah. So if these guys come when they start taking your guns, it's not because they want to protect you. It's because they probably want to steal from you at an even higher degree and or kill you. Mm-hmm. And people are like, well, but why would they want to kill us? Well, they only want to kill people that are a threat to the system. So if you're very obedient and you're perfectly content with the government telling you everything you can do, what time you're going to eat breakfast, what you can have for breakfast, when you can have breakfast, what you can do for work, when you're allowed to take a break and when you're not. And if you're okay with being an obedient slave, and that's okay with you, then you will probably be safe from being killed. But if you want freedom, you're a threat to the system.
What Hogg said today?
Who's Hogg?
David Hogg.
This asshole from Parkland.
He's like a student who's like like a communist, like youth leader or something.
Like the skinniest little kid you ever saw. Like he has no arms, but he's really irritating. He always looks like he smells something bad. Anyway, he's a big victim disarmament argument, but he was actually on TV today and used as a reason that we should accept gun control. Wait for it. Wounded Knee.
Really?
Believe it or not. Yeah. He was saying that we needed gun control because the racists mass murdered Indians at Wounded Knee.
So maybe
Now, what he's leaving
fill us
out
in
of
what
that is
happened.
the racists in question were literally the United States Army, the people that he wants to leave the weapons with.
So what happened at Wounded Knee?
At Wounded Knee, there was a large group of Indians who had been fighting and fighting and fighting, and they were tired. So they came in and they finally surrendered, and the U.S. government said, well, you're going to have to give up your guns. And they turned in their guns, and the United States government just fucking murdered them.
I think that's
Surprise!
so. Somebody like David Hogg,
Trust the government.
I think
Ask an Indian.
I think somebody must have stealthily fed him a little bit of information, just enough to where he could totally catch it wrong. This is what I like about the AOC, the congressman from New York City there.
The moron.
Well, I almost think she's like a Republican plant just there to make the Dems look like a bunch of idiots because of all the stuff she says.
That would be hilarious.
I
It
mean,
would be a great tool.
You can't be as stupid as she pretends to be. And I know
Well, my understanding is she was recruited basically as an actress, that she doesn't know anything herself, and that she was just, they got a bunch of pretty women together and looked for one that could play the role of a congressman.
So she reminds me of some of these horse broads I grew up with. Like when I say I grew up with, I know girls that I call them horse broads. I grew up in a horse business, and these girls are generally financially entitled. Daddy bought them all kinds of stuff, and then they go husband shopping, so they get the right guy that can finance them and buy stuff or whatever. Some of them don't stay married too long. It's a wide selection, but they range anywhere from 20 years older than me to 20 years younger than me, and all in between. And I know about 5 or 6 of these girls that are hyper intelligent, very, very smart. And when you meet them, you think they're the most dingiest twits in the world. And they do this stuff purposely, act stupid, put on this show that they're a twit, and it allows them to manipulate people like crazy. Now, this was it Andrea Acosta-Cortez? Is that her name? Not Andrea. I don't know. I just been saying AOC because I'm getting lazy and I'm American.
I really just say the commie bitch.
And so she, I don't believe she's this stupid. See, that was one of the things about George Bush. They'd be like, he's stupid. I'm like, no, he's a great actor. He's not stupid. He's a good actor. The
interesting thing is, if you watch video of George Bush debating as he was running for the governorship of Texas, he sounds like his IQ is like 30 points higher than the George Bush we know. And the theory that I've heard about that is they said they're not going to elect somebody that smart as president, so you're going to have to dumb it down if you want to get elected.
So, Dave.
The whole thing's an act. And these guys they're putting on, it's a big show.
It would be fascinating. I'd love to meet him in person.
Give you the illusion that you have a choice, but you don't.
So Dave, Tritium in the chat writes, Silver Dave looks like what the other two bearded dudes would look like if they were massively fit. We would look like you if we were massively fit.
You would look like me.
That's what he says.
The last 20-year-old who tried me, I whooped, so that's all I got to contribute to that.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for the compliments. That's positive feedback.
So it's midnight. We're going to be done with this.
Jay Newton can actually lift a lot more weight than me.
And I want to thank you guys for coming on the show tonight. And we are having a good time doing this. Maybe we'll do it again next week. And I got some music going.
Jay, thanks for having us on the show. It's been a great pleasure to be on here with you. Thanks, Nobody. You guys are really great. It's just an awesome time to be here with you. And to all the listeners out there, thanks for listening. You rock. And I hope you tune into us next week. Same time, same place.
Yeah, well, I think between a few of us here, we could keep this going on Wednesday nights, even if I can't.
I think it's important. I think that it's important.
And vote for nobody.
Vote
Because
for
nobody
nobody.
gives a fuck.
And hopefully, we're gonna do some horse-drawn campaigning with nobody.
Whenever I think it's two, there's always three. 'Cause if you think you're free,
If you think you're free,
then you can't escape.
you can't escape.
And if you think you're free,
If you think you're free,
then you can't escape.
you can't escape.
Oh, this looks tasty.